Ah, Mrs. Saar, welcome to the Norwegian Embassy. Good to meet you. Please sit down. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I feel very privileged both to be able and that you give me the opportunity to tell a little bit about my reading habits, as well as a little bit of Norwegian and Korean literature as well, and also perhaps telling a little bit about the close Korean-Norwegian relations. There's a kind of a trend. I think over the last few years we have seen more. But still, the mountain that I've been to the most, which always gives me this breathtaking feeling when I get to the top, is the Bukhansan area, which is very close to the Seoul greater city, and it combines the ability to walk in some difficult areas and still very close to the city, and when you get to the top you have this breathtaking view of the greater metropolitan Seoul, which is always gives a very nice feeling. I have to admit I have not read that book, but I've heard of it, and when you asked me about it, I also thought I have to put that on my must-read list, so I will make up for that. But I have read Korean literature as well, and I'm right now in the middle of Princess Bari. I'm a little bit uncertain whether I would try to pronounce the name correctly, but it's a very exciting book, and I think it gives a good description of both. It's both a combination of fiction and historical aspects, and that I always like that combination. So that's a book I like. But I think also I have to admit that maybe too much of my time reading is spent reading literature that is connected with my work as well. So both facts, figures, political stuff, economical stuff that requires some time. But I love to read normal fiction books as well. I think that's an important part of life. Even if it's not of today, it's not 100 years ago. So I find that quite interesting. I think you have always on the bestseller lists in Norway. I think it's a little bit based on the time of year. Now, summer literature, people are on vacation. It's normally maybe a little bit lighter than what might be in the other times of the year. Around Easter time, people tend to read a lot of crime. But crime, I think, is you will always find crime books on the top 10 lists in Norway. We have many good Norwegian authors. Some of them quite famous. Jo Nesbø is very famous all around the globe. And I think also books about romance, always among the top sellers. If I will be bold enough to see that there's a kind of a trend, I think over the last few years we have seen more books based on normal life, a little bit the same as we see in TV, that reality shows with normal people, everyday people, you and I, is becoming more and more popular, and I think we have seen books that way as well. Some of them quite popular, like Knausgård, who is writing and has become world famous, just writing about his own life. So I think we see a tendency that that kind of books will be represented on the bestseller lists. I think you have always on the bestseller lists. Yes, I mean, first of all, I would like to say that we are very impressed of the way that the Republic of Korea has dealt with the corona situation. I'm also proud to say that Norway has been until now quite successful in controlling the corona epidemic as well, with a very good situation right now. But as we know, this might go up and down, and we still have to be very careful and cautious on how to both open our societies and the measures that we need to introduce. But as you said, there are some differences, although many similarities as well, how Korea and Norway has done it. Reducing activity in the society without necessarily having the lockdown as we have seen in many other countries, but with restrictions, guidelines that people to a large extent have been following. And I think that's one of the important areas. I think also another success criteria, the testing and the tracing that was done here in Korea has been very successful. But you're also right that we have different legislation regarding how we can use, let's say, electronic measures to track people. So that's why we don't have the same solution as you have in Korea regarding the apps. We do have a voluntary app though, but with a somewhat different approach than the Korean one. Whether that's a sign of, countries have chosen different ways. And as I said, there are many similarities in how Korea and Norway have followed up the COVID-19 pandemic. But of course, there are both some cultural aspects and some legal aspects that each and every country they have to adjust their measures in. But I would like to underline though that even though there are some cultural differences, of course, there are so many similarities, and I think those similarities are what has brought our countries so close together. We work so closely together both in the commercial area, in politics, in culture. Actually, Korea is one of our most important trade partners. We have many Norwegian companies here, we have many Korean companies in Norway. I think all the way since the Korean War, when Norway was here represented with the field hospital, these extremely, and I would say almost unique relations.
이렇게 이제 문화적으로 다른 점이 있다는 것은 알고 있지만은 오히려 노르웨이, 한국은
First and foremost, I should say that this was, I think you're aiming for the law that was introduced about 20 years ago with 40% representation, gender equality, both or women, that was the background, in stock-listed companies in Norway. And that was a law introduced by actually from the Conservative Party, a male Minister of Trade, which was perhaps a little bit unexpected. I wouldn't say there were any conflicts, but there were of course discussions whether that was the way to go. Because you will have companies who might be opposing to, at least in a short time, change their boards to fulfill that law. But I think the discussion eased off quite quickly, and we see today that this has been good, it has been fruitful, and I think Norway we have come a long way, and I think Norway definitely is among the most gender equal countries in the world. But we still have to keep this in mind. And I think an additional reason, both that it's important to keep this in mind, but also based on the legislation, is that by ensuring that both men and women have the same opportunities, the same place in the society, we have the privilege of using the whole population for our wealth creation.
네, 그래서 결과적으로 이제 노르웨이는 전 세계에서
No, as we said, it's not the Norwegian government, but it's the Norwegian Nobel Committee, and that was part of Nobel's testament that the Norwegian Nobel Committee was given the possibility to award the Peace Prize. I think since the Nobel Peace Prize probably is the most important international peace prize, with a great interest and of course much attention every year who will get the Nobel Peace Prize. I think many Norwegians feel close to the Peace Prize. It's always a big event in Oslo in December when the award winner comes to Oslo to accept the prize. And I think it's also perhaps gives us a basis of thinking how important it is to work for peace. And I think the respect that we have for the award winners who devote their life and their efforts into fighting for different aspects of peace. You know, there are many different organizations, many different people who have been awarded the Peace Prize over the years, but they all have one thing in common, that's a strong devotion to achieving peace.
있는데 노르웨이는 그러한 국제적 노력도 지지를 하고 있습니다. 그다음에 이제 한반도
That's perhaps the most difficult question in a way to summarize in a book to get to Norway. But one thing that could be, it's not perhaps about Norway, but the Journey of the Bees, which is an interesting book, and is perhaps describing the growing climate engagement among Norwegians, or in our society in general. That could be something. I think also to read fiction books by, I would say, any of the relatively famous Norwegians, whether it's maybe not the crime, but I think I mentioned Roy Jacobsen could be an interesting author to read from, or to read from his books. I think they write about relatively normal people living in suburban Oslo, living in the rural areas of Norway. You know, Norway it's a large country with relatively few people, 5.5 million people. We have a few, well, in a Korean context, not big cities, but we have Oslo with about 1 million people. The other cities are again, in a Korean context, small with 250, 200,000 people, some of them. But a normal average city in Norway is about 30, 35, 40,000 people. And then many people live in rural areas as well. And I think these authors, and many Norwegian authors, they write about this, a relatively typical, normal life among Norwegians. And I think that many Norwegians can relate to, and maybe not always think that this is me, but they can always think this is someone I know. So that is, and also with a combination of nature that brings pictures into your imagination. So I think that's why I like them.